Thank you very much, Mr. President, Excellencies, the Arctic Council for the invitation. What you see on the screen is my favorite Arctic bird. It's called the stern in English, and its Latin name is there. It's a bird that flies from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back. So if he had a card, he would be a billionaire in frequent flyer miles. This bird, in a way, is exemplary for what we're trying to achieve here, which is some kind of a interconnection, between different worlds. There are about 1 million such birds in the world today. They're not very large, but they live a long life for some reason. Maybe the Arctic environment helps. I'd like to start by saying that the Arctic Circle Initiative deals with impacts beyond the Arctic and is already reflected in this conference as it deals with other ice-bound regions of the world in altitude, such as the Himalayas, and maybe at some point in latitude, such as the Antarctic. And even stretching the concept a little bit to large, remote, lowly populated areas, such as the Amazon. Back to the Arctic, as everybody has already spoken about, it is the remaining world reserves of natural resources and energy, water, and animal life. And what is different now and what brings us together here is that there's a growing global interest in these now more accessible reserves in the Arctic. Now I just want to compare Arctic and Antarctic so that you can have a grasp for what I'm going to say next. On the left, at least on my screen, on the left you see the Arctic, you see Greenland covered in white and Iceland covered in green, a small island above number 60-degree latitude. It is on the right you see the Antarctica, which is quite a different system, and I like to compare them both. I think the Arctic, as we know, has small native populations, and Antarctica has no native populations at all. Very obviously, the Arctic is an ocean surrounded by continents, and Antarctica is a continent surrounded by ocean. Trivial, but interesting. And both are environmentally sensitive and climate sensitive areas. On the Arctic, it is possible to exploit mineral resources. On the Antarctic, it's forbidden by treaty. There's no exploitation of mineral resources. Commercial fishing is allowed in both regions. There are 8 sovereign states in the Arctic area, and there are no sovereign rights in Antarctica. There had been claims in the past, but as of the treaty, all those claims were frozen. Forgive me the pun. The Arctic is militarized. It's possible to have military presence, and the Antarctic, it is forbidden to have military presence. The Antarctic Agreement precedes the Arctic Council establishment by a number of years. It results from the 1959 Antarctic Treaty, which was based on an American initiative to more or less control the various claims that were being placed on the territory of the Antarctic. In 1996, Canadian initiative and other Arctic countries in Ottawa, they signed the Arctic Council Charter. Another comparison that looks a bit odd for us here in Iceland is to think about the Amazon. But in many ways, Amazon and the Arctic have more in common than Arctic and the Antarctica. Not talking about temperature or ecosystems, but they, they cover a large area. In the case of the Arctic Circle, around 14 million square kilometers. In the case of the Amazon, about the size of Australia, 7 million square kilometers. The Arctic Council is the intergovernmental medium through which the countries work. In the case of Amazon is the Amazon Cooperation Treaty, which was established in '78, and then an organization of the treaty was established in 2002. They share in common small, remote, and native populations. They are both environmentally and climate sensitive. It is possible to exploit for minerals. Commercial fishing is allowed. By sheer coincidence, there are 8 sovereign states in both organizations, and it is possible to have military forces there. I mention those comparisons because perhaps thinking about them, we may have some inspiration of ideas to deal with the Arctic. Now, climate change challenges the world in general because it is a global phenomenon, except that it happens faster at the poles for many reasons. And it's been recognized that global warming connects all of us, not just the physical features, but the people as well. And this was enunciated by Sheila Watt Cloutier of the Inuit Circumpolar Council in 2005. It's a very simple statement, but very profound, because it helps, justify why we are all here, not just Arctic peoples, but the whole world is here because global warming connects all of us, planet and people. In climate, there has been a long history of natural cycles changing the climate. It's very well known and documented. What is different is that it has been established within scientific levels of confidence, like 95%, and enunciated by the IPCC just last month, that humans are the major groups responsible for the change in climate. And humans, because they are the responsible parties, they have choices. They can protect the environment, or they can develop the environment. And if they develop the environment, it will be better if they will do it sustainably, as many speakers have said already. And bear in mind that sustainable development implies environmental protection. So if you opt for sustainable development, you're already protecting the environment. So in the case of the Arctic, one can think of, in regards to climate change, one can think of mitigation or adaptation. Well, mitigation has to do with controlling emissions or choosing ways of working that use less emissions, like fossil fuels, using, as the speaker from Greenland said, renewable electricity generation by hydroelectricity. But there are limited choices for mitigation. But one has to look at the opportunities. There's lots of wind in the Arctic. Maybe some of that can be turned into electricity. But I think the major issue here in the Arctic is more adaptation to the new Arctic. And what is the new Arctic? The new Arctic, historically speaking, is a new era of great navigations. Many of you may remember that the Portuguese have opened the world to international trade in the 1500s by finding a maritime way to the Orient. And what is happening here in the Arctic today, I suggest, is of the same importance of the great navigations of the past. These new shipping lanes that are being developed will compete from a freight point of view with the Suez and Panama Canal, and if Nicaragua ever builds a canal, with that canal as well. And then The opening of the Arctic promotes oil and gas exploration, as everybody knows, and also facilitates access to mineral waters offshore and onshore. This new Arctic expands commercial fishing. It promotes shipping, new infrastructure, ports, shipbuilding. It creates jobs and encourages education and training for the native populations. And it evolves, interesting enough, from my perspective at least, from a region that was strategic militarily to a region that becomes economically strategic. The new Arctic, on the other hand, threatens livelihoods of native populations and animal life, which become climate refugees or may become climate refugees. They are forced to move their environments because of climate change. It impacts the food supply chain, as the first speaker in this session mentioned, from the bottom of the ocean to the polar bear to the humans. And it exposes a very fragile environment of the Arctic to new risks that have to do, for instance, with the release of methane from the permafrost. And methane, as you all know, is a very potent greenhouse gas. And it, different from the past, it might change what exists today, which is a piece which I call environment peace. It's something that I created way back when I saw the Kuwait oil fields on fire, and I said, well, if environment can be used as a weapon of war, it can also be used as a weapon of peace. It will switch from that, it may challenge the peace with economic conflicts. And what can we do about it? We can mediate conflict and competition on the economic, environmental, political, and cultural levels. We can maintain the environment peace in the face of new global and in the face of new global economic interest. We can manage the Arctic resources beyond national jurisdiction. It's important to bring to life the UN Law of the Sea of 1982, have all countries signed it up, and a strong impact effort on Arctic science to support Arctic policy. And the last slide, if Mr. Chairman allows me, will suggest that adaptation and mitigation as a plan of action for the Arctic, promoting low carbon technologies depending on how much carbon will cost, harmonizing, that's important, harmonizing climate policies among Arctic Council member countries, look at the domestic priorities of each Arctic country versus funding sources, public and private. And importantly, and that is the very last conclusion here, Mr. Chairman, is that the Arctic Circle Initiative is a marvelous example of stakeholders' engagement in decision-making within the Arctic, but it also applies outside the Arctic. And it could encourage going beyond the Arctic Council platform via the resources and the energies and the enthusiasm that the Arctic Circle brings about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergio.